So addressing the role of fear is a big challenge, and the fear of Muslims, Islamophobia, is pervasive in many places around the world these days, in Europe, here, and also in the region near Burma. I'm sure there are places where Buddhists are also mistreated or have been mistreated. This is unfortunate dynamic that is a cycle in our history. But asking Alex to jump in, because when I speak at a mosque on this, I never want to go into us versus them, that, you know, this is a Buddhist problem and Buddhists are against Muslims. No, never. I mean, this is about, I mean, you see how interfaith we are and diverse, and that this is a human problem. And so we're not pointing fingers at any group, and we don't want fear of Buddhists, fear of Muslims, or any of this. But we do want to identify the players out there who are distorting traditions and distorting, using fear politically. So that said, Alex is editor of with Tricycle Magazine, which is a Buddhist magazine, and I'll let you speak.
Hi. Maybe I should start by saying why I'm here, why Tricycle has taken up this issue, and it's related to what Bruce was talking about, fear, and also that this whole Wiratu and the 969 movement, their rhetoric, their hate speech is essentially couched in a rhetoric of the defense of Buddhism. And there's a lot of talk about defending Buddhist land, defending Buddhist women. This is all couched in a language of defense. So there's something to be said about that. The thing, what will make this all easier to begin with is to just accept that all religious traditions and have various sanctions for violence and ultimately war. But it's important to look at the historical and social and political context in which these sanctions are deployed, because they're only deployed in very specific contexts. I like to talk about the story of Nalanda University, or the institution of Nalanda in India, because it's a kind of prototypical historical occurrence that pretty much sums up ideas about the relationship between Buddhism and Islam. In the very early 13th century, Nalanda in India, which was the premier Buddhist institution in the world, and scholars from all over Buddhist Asia would come to learn at Nalanda. At the very beginning of the 13th century, there were Muslim conquests of India, and the story goes that Nalanda was destroyed by these Muslim conquerors. This isn't quite true. Buddhism was in decline already, and the Buddhist elite actually cut deals with the Muslim invaders in order to maintain power, and Nalanda existed for well into the 13th century. But this story that in the Buddhist world, at least, Nalanda is very important Buddhist history, and it's always this story that essentially comes up or repeats itself. It was repeated in March 2001, shortly before, about half a year before September 11th, the Taliban destroyed the Bamiyan Buddhas, and it was covered in the media as a kind of senseless act of violence. Again, you had these kind of serene statues of Buddhas that seemed to be senselessly destroyed by the Taliban, by Muslim extremists. Not mentioned in the media is that these statues had essentially survived 1,300 years of Muslim rule, and that they were destroyed specifically in protest of international aid reserved for the maintenance of these statues at the same time that Afghanistan was undergoing a famine. Anyway, what emerges from these stories is that, and a long history of Orientalism, is that Buddhism is kind of rational post-Enlightenment philosophy, not even necessarily a world religion, and hence kind of excuse all the religious wars and whatnot attached to world religion and all the trappings of world religion, whereas Islam is violent and irrational and based on blind faith. Both of these are characters of the religion, and both are untrue. So I see this kind of misconception, these two misconceptions of both religions as a kind of fertile ground for interfaith dialogue.